One thing I didn't mention about the trip down to Mexico with our students, a number of people have asked, do you need more volunteers to go down there just to help with just keeping the kids safe and stuff? And the answer is no. We've got more than enough adult workers going down there. In fact, we have a student-to-adult ratio we've never had. Back in the day when I was going on trips like that, it was like 150 kids to every one adult, and I could pretty much do all the stuff I shouldn't do on those trips. But seriously, we have one adult for every 2 kids going down there. If we had any more adults, it would like wreck it. It would be like an adult trip or something down there. So, and there are a number of security measures that we've put in place, and a kind of an advanced plan that we've got with that, working with the Moore Ministries and stuff on it. So anyhow, okay, to the sermon here. About a year ago, I went dirt bike riding with Chandler. He's got some friends, the Sheebers, and they've got dirt bikes. So we got to go dirt biking with them. It was Chandler's first time to ever ride a dirt bike. We had a great time, and literally the whole day went really well. We get back, and we're about ready to load up the bikes on the trailer, and we're just going to do one more spin around the trucks for like a photo op, right? Just take a few pictures on the bike. And so Chandler's running his motorcycle around the thing and takes it a little bit wider than he did the time before, and smiling for the camera, and doesn't notice that as he gets a little bit wider, there's like a little ravine that's just washed out. It's about 2 feet wide and about 2.5 feet deep. I mean, it's just a ditch. Never saw it. Just comes flying around, and right into it. Front wheel goes into it. The whole bike flips over, kicks him off the bike. The motorcycle lands on him, on my son. And I ran over there as fast as I could, and he's like, "Oh, I'm hurting," and all this stuff. And I'm like, "Shake it off. Shake it off, just shake it off, because that's what dads do, okay, shake it off, you're okay. My arm, it's killing me, can you move your fingers? Yeah, you're good, just shake it off. So we load up, and so a few days later, his arm's still hurting, and I take him to the doctor. It's broken. Not my best parenting moment, okay? 3.5 days later, I take him to the doctor for his broken arm. But he's built a lot of good character from that. So it kind of... But we get home, and, we walk through the door, and, Chandler's and she's like, "Looks like a motorcycle landed on you." Well, yeah, but the question is, what happened? What happened? You're just supposed to go out and have fun, and you come back, and, you're all banged up. Well, that is a question we ask oftentimes when we look at this world. You look at Egypt and you say, what happened? Why? How could this all go so bad? You look at our world. There's lots of things we see in this world and we go, what happened? Sometimes we look at our own lives and we say, what happened? In fact, Paul says it this way. In the New Testament, he says, why do I do the things I do not want to do? And just like, what happened? And of course, the what happened goes all the way back. Genesis 3 begins to explain to us what happened. There's a crash. There's a crash that took place, right, in Genesis 3. And it goes back to that garden, and it goes back to a tree in the garden. Remember the tree in the garden? Right? It's got the Garden of Eden, and God sets it up, and the garden's all great and wonderful. I'm sure there were like mountain bike paths all through there, and motocross tracks. It's probably wonderful. And then what did God do? God went and put this tree in the garden and said, "You're not allowed to eat from it." Well, I've been thinking about this. I don't think that was such a good idea on God's part, because it just messed everything up, right? If God wouldn't have put the tree in the garden, this kind of would have all worked out really well, right? But he had to go and put that tree in there and tell us not to eat from it, right? And so you ask the question, if God's goal was to have a world, a universe where no one would sin, that he'd make the Imago Dei, he'd make human beings with dominion, right? And to have dominion means you have creative abilities, you have thinking abilities, it means you have desires, it means you have the ability to control, it means you're free, you have a free thinking mind, okay? The ability to make, the freedom to really choose things. That all goes with having dominion. You put all that together, and then you put something in there we're not supposed to do, and it's just like, this is dangerous, this is risky. So why did God do that? Because it doesn't seem to make sense unless you begin to consider maybe God's number one purpose wasn't to create a universe where there would be creatures with dominion that would not sin. And now I'm not saying we're all for sin or something like that, but maybe his ultimate goal wasn't to create a sin-free world, because if it was, he should have never put the tree in there. Right? So what was God up to? I've got a great illustration that illustrates all this, but I've got it right back in the shop here. So I'm going to go back here in the shop and get this. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back, okay? I'll be right back. Can you hear me now? Okay, here we go. There we go. I love my job sometimes. Okay, now. Now, I'm kind of going back to my original story with the dirt bike. This is Drake Schieber's dirt bike. If you're in here, Drake, thank you for letting me borrow your dirt bike. He's Chandler's friend. This is actually one of the bikes we took out on our trip. But I'm going to say something you probably never thought you'd hear in church, okay? I think that tree in the garden is a lot like a dirt bike, okay? You're like, where is he going? Here's the deal. I want you to think about this. If your goal is to not get injured, don't get on a dirt bike, okay? Now, everyone who goes dirt biking, or most of them, never want to get hurt. They never want to crash. That wasn't our intention. But you know what? If that's really your number one intention, then you'd never get on a dirt bike. So why get on a dirt bike, right? Because there's something else. See, with a dirt bike, there is an inherent risk, right? Just ask my son. He'll tell you. There's an inherent risk, but that inherent risk affords the opportunity for something else. It affords the opportunity to have the fun and excitement and the adventure of getting out and getting bugs in your teeth and driving out in the dirt and jumping dirt berms and all that wonderful stuff you do on a dirt bike. In the same way, I want you to think about that tree in the garden. That tree came with a great inherent risk, didn't it? But that inherent risk afforded the opportunity for something else, something great. See, that tree afforded the opportunity for a genuine relationship of trust between God and humanity. But it came with a great risk. That's what's going on. In fact, if you have your Bibles, look with me. Let's turn to Genesis chapter 2. I want to show you something here in Genesis chapter 2. Genesis chapter 2. Look with me at verse 9. Verse 9, because here's the story of the tree right here. It says, and the Lord God made all kinds of trees to grow out of the ground, trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food. So I want you to picture this. God makes this whole universe, and he makes the garden. There's all these wonderful things. He makes you and me, and we've studied this in the past. He makes us the imago Dei, the image of God. And with that, we are sexual creatures with dominion. And that means, right, we've got passions and desires. We've got a drive for purpose. We long for things, and we have the freedom to choose and make choices. All of this stuff. And then he put us in a world, right? We looked at this a week or two ago, where there's gold and spices for food and artwork, all this stuff. But I want to argue this. If God only gave us those blessings and never put the tree in, then there would be no edge to our dominion. There would be a part of who we are as creatures with dominion that would always fall flat, because we wouldn't get to fully exercise the potential of that dominion. It wouldn't be any teeth to it. So look at what God does here. Second half of verse 9. In the middle of the garden, and there's two trees, in the middle of the garden were the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And that tree, the knowledge of good and evil, of course, is the tree that he says you don't eat of it. When it says the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that's not saying that whoever eats of this tree will suddenly have moral discernment. Sometimes it's taken as that. That's not true. If If they didn't have moral discernment for this, then it wouldn't matter if they ate from it because they wouldn't have the moral discernment to discern it. You understand what I'm saying? If that made sense? Okay. Yeah, just say sure. We got you, Glenn. Here's the point of the tree. The tree is about who gets to determine what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is evil. And what this verse is saying is God makes all of this stuff, makes you and me as the Imago Dei, and says, have freedom. Use who you are. Take the things of this world. Enjoy it. Go after it. Except in one area, and that one area is mine. I want you to trust me with what is good and what is bad, what is good and evil. See, all of a sudden, putting this tree in the garden creates a moment where there's something we must trust God over. See, without the tree, there's no need to trust God. And without trust, friends, there is no genuine relationship. The fact that it creates a little bit of conflict here. All of a sudden, Adam and Eve are in this place where they don't just have freedom to just trust in everything. There's a place here where they need to be vulnerable with God. And in that conflict of what that means becomes the beginnings of a genuine relationship of love and trust. See, that's why the tree is kind of like a dirt bike. It's very risky because they can choose not to trust God in this. It's very risky for God. God puts the tree where human beings can actually rebel against him. He's vulnerable. But it is in that vulnerability that the thing that's contained that's so good in this, is the fact that there can be a genuine relationship of love and trust in there. Now, what happened, right? So we've got this situation. What happened, though, is with that freedom, with that great risk, came what? Came a crash, came the fall. The theological term you often hear about that is the fall of man, is this terrible crash. And what's important to notice in this crash that occurs back in Genesis 3 is that Adam and Eve used their dominion, the very thing that God created in them. They used that very thing to sin against God. So I want us to look at that real quickly, and I want you to see what's going on here with their use of dominion, with Eve's use of dominion. Turn with me to Genesis 3. We'll look at it here. Look at what happens here. Look at verse 6. It says, when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food, and just pause there for a moment, this idea of good. Remember, all through Genesis 1 and 2, in coming into this, who always uses the term good? And saw that it was good. God does. And all through Genesis, what's occurring there is God is the one who has owned the determination of what is good and what is bad. That has all been God's. And suddenly Eve looks at this thing and says, I see that it's good. And suddenly she's using her dominion, her freedom, and to analyze, and a good thing, but she's beginning to misuse it at this point to say, I'm going to determine what is good. Something God asked me to trust him with, I'm not going to trust him with it. Goes on. Says here, and pleasing to the eye and also desirable. And again, seeing something as desirable, that's part of who we are as creatures with dominion, that we have desires and passions in this world. It's a part of who we are, but she's using that to kind of get her down the wrong path. And then also, this is kind of interesting, for gaining wisdom. Well, here's the truth. There was no new wisdom gained in this moment, right? That's just kind of some self-deception that's going on in there. And you know what? As human beings, we have that ability. God created us with the ability to be self-deceptive when it suits us in this. And then it goes on. She took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. And what you see here in this first moment, and this is real important, it's not simply that they broke a rule. It's not simply that here's a rule and they break it. This was the use of their dominion to violate this relationship they had with God, this trust relationship. She's using her dominion. Now I want to give you a definition for sin here. I want to give you a working definition out of Genesis 3 for sin here. Sin is the misuse of our dominion to violate a relationship with God, others, or ourselves. See, it's not just breaking a rule. It is when we use the very nature of who God created us to be and we violate a relationship. And here it's with God. Let me illustrate this. Would it have been enough if Eve didn't use her dominion, if she didn't use her free will to choose to break this rule? If it was just a rule, right? What if the serpent would have tricked Eve by making a fruit salad? What if the serpent would have said, hey, making fruit salad tonight, it's going to be really good, cuts a bunch of fruit in there, and then when she's not looking, slips a little of the forbidden fruit in there, and Eve accidentally eats it. Would that have been the same thing here? No, because the point isn't that she ate the fruit. The point is she used her dominion. She used her free will, her freedom of choice to do this, right? It's not like the serpent could have waited till, Adam was asleep under a tree, like that, and just like dropped a little sliver of the fruit in his mouth and then swallowed it. And no, right? It's that they used their dominion. And specifically, they use that freedom of choice within their dominion to do this. Sin is the misuse of our dominion to violate a relationship with God or with others or ourselves. It's more than just breaking a code. And here's why this is important. Here's why I bring this up. Is because oftentimes when we see sin as merely just breaking a rule, sometimes it's described as missing the mark. I think those all fall short of a substantial definition of what sin is. Because when it's just missing the mark, when it's just breaking a rule, it negates the relational side of this. And the whole point of that tree in the garden is that it afforded the opportunity to have a trust relationship with God. And that trust is what was violated. When we sin, ultimately what we're saying is, God, I don't trust that you have my best in mind. God, I don't trust that you know what you're doing. See, that's the heart of sin. It's a relational thing. Now, there are some ongoing consequences to this that are described in here that are important for us to note. Look with me back, Genesis 3. Look at verse 7. It says this. It says, then the eyes of both of them were open, and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Now, there's this imagery here in the Hebrew poetry of the eyes being open, and it's like something changes forever in them. There's like a irreversible change. Their eyes, they now see in a different way. Something's happened, and it's not good. Okay, and this is, let me describe it in this way. Here's what's happened. They have become predisposed to sinning, and that's been passed on to you and me. You and I are predisposed to misusing our dominion to violate a relationship with God, others, or ourselves. In the same way that glass is predisposed to shattering, the way, I suppose, buttered bread is predisposed to always falling, buttered side down or whatever, the way nitroglycerin is predisposed to blow up, you and I are predisposed to misuse our dominion. We're predisposed to it. And that's part of what Genesis is trying to happen. There was a crash. And now we all live with our eyes wide open. Something's happened. We are now aware of how we can act. And it's this predisposition. The theological term for that is sin nature. We all have this sin nature to us. We're quite capable of crashing our lives. It's interesting also, the imagery that's used here is very relational. It says, look back at verse 7, it says, and they realized they were naked. Well, I promise you, Adam realized Eve was naked before this point. I'm quite sure of it, okay? All right? Here's what's going on. This is connecting a thought to the end of Genesis 2. And read this on your own sometime. There is this beautiful relational picture at the end of Genesis 2 with Adam and Eve, Ish and Isha, where it says, and they were naked and they felt no shame. And this idea of these two individuals being naked and having no shame is this idea of, it's relational, completely vulnerable, trusting of one another, the way a relationship should be. There's no shame. They don't have to wear masks. They can be the truest version of who God created them to be with no mask, fully trusting the other. Man, isn't that a gorgeous picture? And what happens here? They lose that. They see one another, and now they have to wear masks. Now they feel vulnerable. Now that trust doesn't come so easily. And that's what it is to be predisposed to misusing our dominion. And we all struggle. That's what it is to have a sin nature. And so now we live in this world that struggles with this. So with the time that remains, I want to talk a little bit about what do we do with this now? So if this is what's happened, what do we do with this? So I want to talk a little bit about how temptation works and how we can push back against it, because we're all predisposed to misusing our dominion in a way that violates our relationship with God, others, or ourselves here on this. So let me first talk about how temptation works. First thing is this: temptation always pushes on our desires. Remember, God made you the imago Dei. He made you a creature with lots of desires. And we're all different in this, that we all value those desires in different ways, but it can be desire for security, a desire for value, a desire for joy or adventure or excitement. It can be sensual desires. It can be a desire to love or be loved, a desire for intimacy. Those are all wonderful, legitimate desires. But understand how temptation works. Temptation always starts by pushing on one of those desires. Never starts by trying to push on a desire that you don't have, okay? It starts with your God-given desires. And I'll explain it this way. Temptation, what it's doing is temptation is pushing us to fulfill one of those legitimate desires in the wrong way. That's what temptation is doing. It's trying to get us to fulfill one of those legitimate desires in the wrong way. Let me give you a couple examples of this. For instance, with affairs, oftentimes what happens, with many women with affairs, is that it starts with a legitimate desire to feel beautiful, to want to be beautiful, and you know what? That is a good thing. But if that desire to feel beautiful starts getting fulfilled in the wrong way by the wrong person, it can begin leading to something else. Likewise, with men, oftentimes, and this may surprise you, okay, but oftentimes with men, an affair starts with a legitimate desire for excitement or adventure or something along those lines. And somewhere they're not meeting that need of adventure and excitement in the right way. And you know, there's something very risky and very exciting about an affair. Right? There's a lot of risk in that, and a lot of endorphins and dopamine flowing and through your brain and everything. And that can lead to trying to fulfill that desire in a sexual way inappropriately. But that's how temptation works. It starts with a legitimate desire and pushes us toward fulfilling that desire in the wrong way. Second thing temptation does is that it pushes us to mistrust God. A temptation attacks our belief that God can be trusted in that circumstance, or whatever circumstance that we find ourselves in. In fact, if you look over at Genesis, look at chapter 3, look at verse 4 there. And here's kind of the dialogue. Here's what the serpent is saying to Eve. He says, "You will not surely die," the serpent said to the woman, "for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be open." And what he's doing here is he's challenging the integrity of God here. He's saying, "No, God didn't really mean that. Did God really mean that? In fact, maybe what God's really," and you can read this on your own, kind of what the serpent's doing, saying, you know, what God really knows is that you're going to be more like him. And hey, maybe I'm not saying, but maybe he thinks he doesn't want you to be that way. And it's like building this mistrust between Eve and God. In fact, as you read through the entire encounter, this temptation of Adam and Eve, everything the serpent does is all about attacking the relationship between God and Adam and Eve. It's all a relational attack. And the idea here, when we face temptation, oftentimes it attacks that sense of trusting God. And we start feeling this: God, do you really have my best interest in mind? God, do you really know what you're talking about? I mean, God, maybe that's good. Maybe that was good back in the Old Testament way back then, but I don't think it's very good now. We're in the digital age or something, God. And it attacks that sense that we can trust God. Third thing that temptation does is it pushes us towards self-deception. And we saw that with Eve when there's that moment where Eve is saying, she sees that it'll make her wiser. Well, no, there's nothing about eating that fruit that would make you wiser. But, if she tells herself that enough times, it just makes it a little more palatable to go ahead and do that. And that occurs in several different ways. One, we end up justifying a sin. We say to ourselves, let me give you an example of that. It's just like, I could cheat on my employer because, it's a big company and they'll never miss it. They don't need it. It's no big deal, right? And so we start justifying our sin to do something that we know is wrong, that's going to be cheating our employer for financial gain for us maybe. But here's the deal. It doesn't matter if your company's big enough. It doesn't matter if it won't hurt the company you work for, because what God is saying is, I'm the one that gets to decide what is right and what is wrong. And I want you to trust me. Don't justify it for yourself. Trust me on this. And if that's wrong, and you know that I think it's wrong, trust me on this, see? But temptation pushes us to, I'm going to justify this. Or the other one is we set ourselves up as the exception. Right? Well, everyone else should do that, right? That makes sense for everyone else, but not me. I'm the exception to this. And I want to say this. I want to say this kindly, without judgment. But this is an example that just really works, because it's maybe the example I hear more than any other example. I cannot tell you how many times I've met with someone who's in the middle of a divorce, and it's a divorce that they shouldn't be getting, okay? And I'm not saying all divorce is wrong. That's a muddy situation with a lot of things, but there are a lot of people getting divorces that shouldn't be giving up on their marriages. And of course, one of the issues that always comes up is the kids. What's this going to do to the kids? And I can't tell you the countless times I've had people say, I know it's terrible for kids, and I know what to do, but my kids, see, they're the exception. This is actually going to, and here's what I always hear, it'll actually be better for my kids. No, it won't. And temptation always wants us to feel like we're the exception, that we're the exception. See how it works? The other one with that is we become myopic relationally with this. We deceive ourselves in thinking that how we use our dominion will have no effect on God or other people, or even a devastating effect on ourselves. We just think in that moment. And that's why I don't want us to think of sin as just breaking a rule. It's not just breaking a rule. It is when we use the most beautiful thing God created in us, our dominion, and we use that very thing to violate a relationship with God or with others or even with ourselves. We hurt ourselves in this. And that's how temptation works. So, let me speak for just a moment about how to push back against temptation in this. And this can't be exhaustive, but if you're here this morning and you're just saying, oh, Glenn, there's some temptation in my life, and I struggle so much with it, okay? Let me give you two things that maybe will help you push back against those temptations in your life. The first one is this. Recognize what desires you are predisposed to handle the wrong way. What are you predisposed to handle incorrectly? And more importantly, what legitimate desire is there that you're trying to fulfill in the wrong way? Start there. Understand your pattern. Because once you understand what the desire is that you're struggling with, see, now you're getting a few layers deeper, and it becomes easier to use your dominion in the right way to make some decisions about that. And another note on this, one about grace. Every one of us in this room, have predispositions to misuse our dominion in ways that will violate our relationship with God, others, and ourselves. We need grace. And oftentimes, especially in Christian circles, we can get a little judgmental with people who have a different predisposition than we do, right? We've got lots of grace for our predisposition, oftentimes, right? But then we look at someone else who's struggling with something different, and it's just like, well, they need to get their act together. Boy, God's upset with them. Why, and just, we need to say, we all struggle with what it is to have a sin nature. And what we need is grace and encouragement and support for healing and recovery and moving to a better place in this. We want to be a church that's not the church that's trying to sit in the seat of being the judge. We want to be the church that flows with grace. right? That's the church we want to be. Secondly, and this is just real practical, as you identify what that area, what that desire is that you're predisposed to fulfill the wrong way, seek God's help in how to fulfill that desire in a healthy way. Don't try to pretend you don't have the desire. Don't try to stop having that desire. Sometimes that makes it worse, okay? Begin with, God, I've got this desire, and I think it's legitimate, but I don't know how to fulfill it in a way that is healthy. Start seeking God and see if you can't find healthy ways to fulfill that beauty, or that desire, whether it's beauty, or whether it's adventure, whether it's a sensual desire, whether it's a desire for security. Find a healthy way. And here's what you'll find in this. I'm going to ask the worship team to come out here, because I want you to think just for a moment, what desire do you have that always gets you on the wrong path, that just kind of leads you to that place where you misuse your dominion? I want you to think about this. It may be a struggle for you with that particular area of sin or desire. But have you ever thought that it is that very issue, that very sin that you struggle with, that in some ways becomes your best opportunity to relate to God? Because it is that place that you struggle to now begin to trust God to fulfill that desire in the right way. You're going back to what that risk was all about when God put the tree in the garden. Because it is at that point that is you, that conflict that you go through, that you're risking to trust God, that becomes the place where your relationship with God can go the deepest, because it is the greatest opportunity of trust in your life. And maybe God can take an area in your life that is a struggle, a shadow, and make it into something good.